Hi, I'm Dean Walker. I'm the founder of a small organization on the interwebs called Living Resilience. And for going on 9 years now, I've been providing transformative support and resources and practices to the collapse aware and collapse acceptant communities. That means people who are bravely facing human caused collapse of both Earth and human systems. And this particular video, the purpose of it is to let you know how things are different in 2024. I've come to a resolute, quite refined, different space in my own practices and in my own experience of what's going on in the world. And so I've shifted the primary focus of living resilience to be the inner work of collapse. That is literally the elevator pitch. That's what we do here in Living Resilience. Whether we're watching the Poetry of Predicament YouTube channel podcast, or you're attending our weekly Safe Circle support calls, or you're a part of our community of practice, in-depth experiential practice group. No matter, you could be taking part in any of our online self-paced recorded courses that are kind of an introduction to this space. Wherever it is you are, it's our intention that we are going to be orienting all of us at any level to the appropriate level of inner work that can be accommodated by folks with the amount of capacity at any of the levels of Paul Chefurka's stages of awareness. Now, you might be brand new to this conversation, and Paul Chefurka, who's that, and what's the stages of awareness? That's what this video is about. It's about orienting us all to what's different about the work of living resilience from there are quite a few other content providers in this collapse aware or collapse acceptance space. Some are helpful, and some are at the same level as, for instance, our Safe Circle calls, which are a drop-in style support group. And I'm afraid that that level, while it's absolutely needed for the people who are at that level of experience and understanding of the situation in the predicament and collapse that is going on around us, those are not sufficient. That kind of call, that drop-in style support call, as useful as they are in those beginning stages of awareness, they will take us not very far in terms of the expansion of our capacities in any real scale to be present in the face of ever-growing stressors. Now, there's a field of exploration of this whole topic that is sometimes called sense-making. And I'm going to be starting out this video after I get talking here with an opening piece from one of the foremost experts in the sense-making field, Daniel Schmachtenberger. And you will hear him in the beginning, just after I stop speaking here, you'll hear his opening in a conference in Sweden late last year. In his opening is more authentic and actually a bit more pessimistic than I've ever heard him be before. And it is not my intention, nor the intention of Living Resilience, to just doom scroll and feed people more and more discouraging news. That's not the point at all. In fact, quite the opposite. So I hope you'll get a taste of what it is we are actually committed to here. But it is important to know that one of the most capable sense-making experts on the planet is actually hitting a few walls in his experience of just how willing is humanity to do what it takes. There is a substantial amount of inner work that is called for. And he is quite articulate in all aspects of collapse, including how to articulate the types of inner work that are called for. That is not the purpose of his talk. I will be including the link to the entire talk in the show notes for this particular conversation that we're going to have here. But primarily the focus of this video is to inform you of what is the work of living resilience. What does it mean to do inner work? And how does one engage with it? I'll be talking about those elements during the body of this video. Then at the very end, I will be also including the way that Daniel Schmachtenberger finished up that talk in Sweden, the last few minutes of it, because he just scratches the surface on a few practices, a few ways in which we could shift ourselves to be more and more capable of being present at the level that is clearly called for in the face of this global meta crisis or poly crisis. And so, again, a little bit of Daniel Schmachtenberger at the beginning, then my conversation with you about what is the inner work that's offered through living resilience at this time to hopefully better prepare us. And then after that portion of the video will be Daniel Schmachtenberger wrapping it up from his conversation and conference in late 2023. So thank you very much for tuning into this, to watching this video. I hope that you are moved by both Daniel Schmachtenberger's sharing and then hopefully what we're offering here in Living Resilience as well. We look forward to hopefully meeting you in some aspect or another of the offerings of Living Resilience.
Reflections on Impact Week yesterday and today. I was sitting in the audience and I was listening to Nate and Olivia and Kate today, and these are people whose work I respect deeply and who are saying some of the most important things that can be said and are brilliant educators. And I was feeling the sense of the recognition that it probably doesn't matter at all. That most everybody will leave and probably continue working the jobs that they work, doing mostly the same types of things. And they will remember what happened, like, okay, we're destroying the atmosphere, we're boiling the oceans, we're killing all the other species, we're doing it at the cost of colonialism, we're on the way towards extinction, and that will last in people's minds till they scroll for a minute, until a bunch of messages come in, and until the bills need paid at most. And I'm thinking about the talks that Bohm and Krishnamurti gave in the 80s, saying very similar things about civilization being on a self-destruct path, or that Bucky gave after World War II, and the people who listened earnestly and everything they were saying has come to pass, and those curves keep doing the same thing. And I was thinking about the Nuremberg trials, where after World War II, when the Nazis were being tried for war crimes, one of the things they were asked was if they believed in everything they were doing. And something like 90% of them said no. At first, they believed the kind of propaganda of the Jewish attack on their population and whatever. But as it got into gassing children, something like 90% of the people who were doing that said, no, I totally didn't believe in it and I thought it was terrible. And then when they were asked, did you try to stop? They all said no. And they quoted German phrases that translated to something like officer's orders, I didn't have a choice. And I think about all the things that we would consider impact like that was just normal life in Tibet before Mao invaded. When we talk about having a civilization that has deeper consideration for other sentient beings and deeper interiority, and Tibet was pretty great at that, and it didn't lead to their civilization continuing when a more power-oriented civilization wanted to end it. I think about, when we're talking about the impending catastrophes, I think about the 100 million Native Americans that were genocided for my country to exist just a minute ago. And we talk about like the values of Western civilization, but modern democracy in the United States occurred on a 100 million person genocide and massive slavery, as well as the destruction of the species. And that genocide was in this part of the exponential curve that is now verticalizing, and people don't have an intuition for how fast it goes from here. And I'm thinking about all of the Chinese soldiers who are going into Tibet, murdering nuns and priests and destroying that culture, and that similarly, they were mostly people who loved their kids and were moral people before being called into that situation. And so I'm thinking about, when I was reflecting, like, what does it take for any of this knowledge to matter? I don't know about the other speakers. I hate public speaking. You were mentioning the fear of it. Like, this is a miserable experience for me. I feel an obligation to have more people understand more of the situation they find themselves in and hopefully care more deeply. One last thing, and then we'll go back to your questions. I was on a call with a friend the other day who has done very successful work in public health globally. He's a good guy. He's a good guy who is used to working on how to make the world better through institutional means, the United Nations and things like that. And he engaged on some projects that we were working on regarding artificial intelligence risks and synthetic biology risks, which are not obvious on the map shared earlier. The map shared earlier were talking about largely the effect of industrial era tech on planetary boundaries. But industrial era tech gives rise to digital era tech, which moves radically faster, right? When you look at the speed at which GPT got used by 100 million users, or threads then in 5 days getting used by 100 million users, compared to how quick it took the steam engine to be used by that many people. But also the impact of it, and just briefly in case people don't know, because this will add something to the meta-crisis, to the thesis of what's been shared so far in terms of the risk we face. The polycrisis is a term more people are familiar with, which is really good. I'm very happy about the polycrisis becoming more aware, so that more common in awareness, so people aren't reductively focused on climate or social justice or whatever one issue they were coming from, but recognizing there are many different critical issues facing the world, and that they're interconnected, and that there are cascades from one to the other, and they need considered together, which is unbelievably important. We more talk about the meta-crisis, which is just a slight distinction in terms of it's not just that there's a lot of different crises and that they're moving towards global catastrophic risks, but that they have underlying dynamics that give rise to them that have to be addressed. But one of the other distinctions is a different way of taxonomizing the problem space, and the issues of advanced technology get some more emphasis. So probably, I mean, I know Nick Bostrom and Anders Sandberg and Max Tegmark are Swedes, so everybody here is probably actually fairly aware of AI risk more than in lots of places. But there was a some studies done in the US just in the last couple weeks on the relationship between the publicly deployed large language models, GPT-4-like things, but the ones that have been jailbroken so that they don't have the same restrictions on them. And pretty much everyone that has been deployed has either been leaked, reverse engineered, or jailbroken very quickly. And the relationship between those and biological development tools, the ability to synthesize genomes of pathogens and things like that, and just asking questions to an AI that can talk to you, that knows all of chemistry, that is published on Wikipedia and online, knows all of biology, knows all of current technology, which would normally be a radically huge team needed to do that, and being able to ask questions like, which companies provide gene synthesis tools that are not government monitored, where I can buy gene synthesis tools without triggering oversight, and what are the most virulent pathogens, and how many people could I kill for $100,000? And questions like that, and it answering. And this is totally nuclear weapons level catastrophic capability, but unlike nuclear, you just have to have an information packet to be able to use it. The knowledge of how to do that travels the speed of light on the internet, radically decentralized, can't be limited to G8. And so and yet from the economic perspective of what every speaker today was talking about, exponential curve goes up, software seems like the answer to planetary boundaries, right? Because we get to keep getting more economic growth without having to use as many resources per dollar. Awesome. We're definitely moving forward as fast as possible with AI in the US in the hope that it'll fix the stagflation and allow us to deal with the economic situation. But it's dual use, it's omni-use. It's basically meaning you develop it for one purpose, but it enables everybody to do every purpose that they have. And the radical enablement of the distribution of human purposes as they exist today is super problematic. But the thing that I was talking to my friend about is we were working on these issues. How do we regulate that type of AI and that type of synthetic biology that has nuclear level catastrophic capabilities, but that non-state actors can get? And he was suggesting to me that that he'd already made action on this. We have to make a public-private partnership where we get all the big AI companies and all the big synthetic bio companies involved, because they're the only ones who know the information, and they're the only ones that can move fast enough because government moves too slow. And they'll be able to come up with the regulation for themselves. And he was serious. He was actually serious about this. And I'm like, are you kidding? Are you kidding about this? And I said, we can't have any revolving doors in this. The people who are regulating the tech cannot have a vested interest in the tech not getting heavily regulated. And he got so frustrated at me. He's like, Daniel, everything in DC is rotating doors. And I'm like, I know, that's why we're going to go extinct. And he got so frustrated he almost had to hang up, because he's like, you're being so unrealistic. Because this is how regulation in the world works. And I'm like, you're being so unrealistic, you're pretending a biosphere can continue to exist. And the issue is that he was grounded in the reality of human history as it has been so far, and I was trying to ground in physics and biology, because we don't get to change those in the same ways, and the two aren't compatible. So I have to be unrealistic to history as it has been so far if I want to be able to think about how to make a human technological civilization compatible with the biosphere and itself and its own continuity. And I think, yeah, one thing, like if I'm going to express what I was reacting to today, is that I do believe we're at the end of history. Like eminently in the lifetimes of everyone in this room, we're at the end of history. Meaning we're at the end of a human civilization defined by the major defining characteristics that what we call written human history from early Egypt or Sumeria or whatever was defined by, which is if you had a peaceful civilization and Genghis Khan wanted that area, or Alexander the Great wanted that area, your peaceful civilization was wiped out. And the same is true if you want to internalize all of the cost of carbon. your country is going to get destroyed geopolitically by whoever externalizes that cost and concentrates the profits. The thing that has been more successfully dominant, extracted more, grown its population more, increased its violence capability wins. And that thing, with exponential tech at planetary boundaries, self-terminates. So either we're at the end of our species, or we're at the end of our species being defined by those parameters. And the end of our species being defined by those parameters requires, I think the last thing I'll say when I was thinking about the Nazis and everyone else in those situations is the famous quote, lots of people have said a quote like this, that it's the complicity of the weak with the wicked that allows the evils of the world to happen. Most of the Nazis were not Hitler, but Hitler couldn't have done shit without a lot of people who obeyed. Most of the Mongols were not Genghis Khan. Most of us are not the people that make the choice to make up bullshit reasons for wars that are false flag for truly economic and geopolitical reasons, but we will still not get in the way of that thing happening. The Iraq war that started all of the recent rounds of wars because of the weapons of mass destruction that we knew they didn't have. Where are the prosecutions for that? Because 4.5 million people were murdered as a result of that. There are a small number of people who are motivated by power exclusively, pretty exclusively, and then there's most everyone else who just needs to pay the bills and not rock the boat too much and wants to feel like they will do good things within the confines of that. So I guess I don't want people to think about how to make their own life regenerative because it doesn't matter. I don't want people to think about how to make Sweden regenerative. I want people to think about what it would take to turn the entire arc of humanity, factoring what is currently driving it, and that everything else that you could do doesn't matter at all because the end of the possibility space of all meaningful human activities is imminent if we don't do that. That's what I'm reflecting on.
So as promised, this is a detailed exploration of the 2024 changes and refinements in the offerings of a small organization on the internet called Living Resilience. We are also known, for those who watch YouTube videos on our YouTube channel podcast, The Poetry of Predicament. So you might be watching this video there. You also could be watching it as you are already a member of the Living Resilience online community space, a Mighty Networks space. And this is meant to be an orientation for anyone to really get a sense of what does it mean to be doing the inner work of collapse. So let's get on with this. This is quite a famous quote. I'd be amazed if everyone watching on this screen wasn't somehow or another familiar with this quote. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And it is exactly that sickness in our society globally that we're addressing in terms of what is the inner work that we might do personally and interpersonally with others in our community, in our family, in our workplace. So it is in the exploration of these refinements, remarkable new offerings from Living Resilience that we hope to be able to address some of that sickness and what is a good measure of health in these times. So as I mentioned before, in the very beginning, there's a kind of an older, longer elevator pitch for this work, which is that Living Resilience is offering transformative support, resources, and practices to people bravely facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. The remarkably shorter elevator pitch that we are using from this year on is that we are offering the inner work of collapse. It's that we hope to make a bit clearer for you what we mean when we say that in this video to start. It's quite possible that you are already very much engaged with these conversations. You may be you may call yourself collapse aware. You may self-assign yourself as collapse acceptant, or you may just call yourself concerned and really not knowing what to do or where to go to find out more about what it is you're concerned about. All of y'all and beyond are welcome. This is not an environment that will shame somebody for not being collapse aware enough or having enough collapse acceptance under your belt. Really, this is a place to come together with whatever level of concern and whatever orientation you have for your consciousness as you look out toward a horizon together. So all are welcome here in this living resilience space. We're going to be using something that is, I found very, very useful, even starting with back in 2015 when I started to research and write my one and only book up to this date called The Impossible Conversation. And this Stages of Awareness model is created by a Canadian man named Paul Chefurka. And I find it remarkably simple and yet tremendously important and viable and useful as a way of orienting ourselves and being able to share a language for how we are each individually engaging with this, which is truly the impossible conversation, the most challenging conversation in human history. So let's get on with this and let's talk about these stages of awareness. The first one, notice that it's, if you remember the blobs of color that were just up there all the way across the screen, this is the largest one on the far left called business as usual. He also calls it dead asleep. And this is the global level of consciousness that we all were born into and we are all super saturated in, no matter how cool we think we are, no matter how evolved or smart we think we are all saturated in this business as usual way of thinking, way of perceiving, way of presencing ourselves on the planet. And by the way, if you have not seen or read Paul Chefurka's actual writing of this Stages of Awareness model, we are including both a link to the full write-up is his original writing will be down in the show notes right at the top of it. And so you can actually just click on that link and read the whole thing. It's a short read, and I think you'll find it quite useful. We also are including just below that a link to the video we use in our introductory course called Collateral Beauty. And that video, while it also includes the remarkable sharing of a young activist from a COP meeting 3 or 4 years ago, this layout in the video that I'm talking about and the link that you can click on down in the show notes, we hope that you will find it more in context than just this layout that I'll be giving you now. There's something that makes it quite real and palpable when you put it together with the sharing of the young activist that I mentioned. So again, business as usual. We are all saturated in it from birth, and it is the rare person that gets any kind of relief from that lifetime of saturation. So what you're going to see is a series of smaller and smaller colored rectangles or shapes, and that reflects each stage up these stages of awareness it reflects a considerably smaller population, part of the population of the world that will ever experience it. So let's start looking at these different steps in the stages of awareness. The first one is one problem, meaning that something happens to you in your life, to your family, to your job, to your community. Something gets your attention in an entirely different way. It rattles you out of the comfort or the insulation of our culture, especially if you're in one of the more privileged countries like the USA. It's very difficult to really feel the impact of any aspect of this predicament, of this collapse that we're mentioning here in this video. It's very difficult for us to make actual contact with it because we are so insulated by our immense privilege and wealth. So something comes along and gets our attention. And it can be very personal, like losing a job. It can be very personal, like losing a loved one, or something, or having a health issue for yourself in your own body. It can also be any of the hundreds and hundreds of examples for the past few years of the disasters that have been happening around the world, the fires, the floods, the storms, the droughts, and so on. It's hard to find an area on the planet that hasn't been affected in the past few years. And certainly they all will be affected in the years to come. So one problem, all that does is get our attention that something's not okay. And I'll just give you a preview of coming attractions. About as good as it gets in the one problem level is that a person who's experiencing this one problem, their major commitment is to get back to business as usual, get back to normal. Do those words ring a bell, like from a recent pandemic, for instance? Okay, we'll move on. The next level is many problems. Starts to be a bit suspicious that we seem to have a lot of things going on. If it isn't a major financial crisis or the immense fragility of those financial systems, it could be more and more of those disasters that I just mentioned. How about a couple of wars? Why don't we throw in a couple of wars on top of it all? I think you get the idea. It's just enough to rattle us into, wait a second, it's not just this one problem. We got a lot going on here. And so the idea is also not just about problems, really. This is Paul Chefurka's way of introducing us to more and more awareness of the interrelatedness of all aspects of our life on Earth. And he's taking us there through this awareness of problems. This next level is many interrelated systems with problems. And so again, starting to see it's not just that everybody's got some problems going on, and it's not just that every country has many problems. But starting to see, wait a second, these seem to be interrelated. It's like systemically, either in regions or in a country or globally. So again, an expansion of our awareness of the systemic nature of what's going on the planet. Notice how the blocks of color are getting considerably smaller. This is not to scale, it's actually far more dramatically small at each step of these stages of awareness, but I had to make them visible. So with your patients at the outsized, smaller, but not small enough, other stages of awareness, let's continue to the next one. This is the fifth and final stage of awareness that Paul Chefurka uses in his model. And it's interrelated human caused predicaments. So it includes all the other realizations and expansion of systemic awareness that were implied before. But now it also includes these predicaments, this polycrisis that we've got going on this planet, is actually reflective of just how interwoven all the systems are, all the different types of life, including humans and all the human systems, that it is all interwoven. So, what makes living resilience work different and this inner work of collapse is that we have designed and curated a tremendous amount of a giant menu of different resources and practices and support for each level of Paul Chefurka's stages of awareness. Now, down here in business as usual and the one problem zone, you got to understand that there's not much willingness, not much interest in all this idea of systemic anything. Remember that the primary attention that most people have when they get themselves knocked off center by a disaster or a personal event that's traumatic and so on, the idea is to get myself back to normal as soon as possible. So there's not a lot of hunger at the business as usual level for resilience skills. It's kind of a hard sell. I can tell you from my experience, if somebody's not directly experiencing some sort of emergent situation, some sort of emergency in their life, that one problem, most people don't want to hear about resilience skills. That they have kind of weird names like self-regulation and co-regulation, and how do we care for one another? And how do I do self-care when I'm so completely knocked off center? Another way of saying that, knocked off center, is that we are dysregulated. If we are centered, another way of saying that we're centered is that we're regulating. We're regulated. We're able to regulate our system. We're able to calm our system down. Whatever's going on, an upset at work or an upset with our spouse or whatever it is, we have the capacity to calm our system down when we have an upset, when we're off center to some degree. So the first aid resilience skills are that level of basic regulation of our system to take ourselves out of being dysregulated and back to a sense of center or being regulated. It's hard to overstate how crippling it is, and I mean to be using that word. It is crippling to be dysregulated. We had a firestorm here where I live in Southern Oregon about 3.5 years ago. And in a 24-hour time, 10,000 people in this valley, that's called the Rogue Valley here in Southern Oregon, were all of a sudden out of their homes. They were burned out of their homes, either homes they owned or rented, and for some people, losing businesses as well. The amount of dysregulation that happens when a person loses their home, when they lose the complete ground beneath them, is the rug is pulled out. And talk about a losing of center. It can be literally crippling. So I'm sorry to be so repetitive, but it's important to understand these are vitally important skills. They're not perhaps as interesting or as spiritual or as specialized as some of the ones we'll talk about in the other stages of awareness. but it is desperately important that you understand or really get in your experience. And perhaps you've experienced this already, so you know what I'm talking about. When you need self-regulation skills, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like getting the real thing to be able to bring yourself back to center, to calm down your nervous system. So we have a number of offerings that we'll talk about in just a few minutes at the first aid level of resilience skills. The next one is practices for resilience. And this is where you're not in the middle of an emergency anymore. You have some amount of normalcy to your space, to your daily living, so that you could actually work on some practices. You could expand some skills or some capacities that could really help you in the next time you're knocked off center, or if you and your family were to take on practices together. We'll get there. There's plenty of information in later courses and later videos to really go into detail, but that's enough for right now. This is where, when people engage with this work, this takes work. This is where the inner work really starts. And so this can take time to master, or at least to become very familiar with some of these important practices. And for some people, this is as far as they go. And something that's very important to say here, this is not a contest of any kind. This is really, comparison is useless here. It's very important to realize that 90+% of the world's population will never get out of business as usual, period. They won't have that one problem way of moving out consciously for even a few moments. They certainly won't reach these practices for resilience unless they, by chance, have somebody else in their life that can share with them some useful practices. So let's move on. The next level is transformative resilience. And this is an interesting overlap that I've discovered in my own lifetime of psychospiritual practices. I started with many of the practices that are implied in this area up here with the butterfly shape. And what I've noticed over the years, and certainly more than ever now, as I'm helping people to walk through their own version of these stages of awareness, when a person sincerely takes on the practices for resilience in the middle with the blue globe, there's a strong probability that sincere engagement with those practices is going to start paying off in terms of being able to be more and more present in the face of larger and larger stressors. And what that means, what the payoff, that's actually quite a payoff right there, to have an expansion of our capacity to be present. But another sincere benefit of people engaging with these practices for resilience is that the modeling, they can then be a model of some amount of that practice for other people around them. They can be a source of calming. They can be a source of co-regulation, being able to regulate together in a family setting or a business setting, and so on. These, I believe, are core skills, and there's the coherence that is implied with co-regulation and with self-regulation at this level. There's an extraordinary extra benefit that can appear more and more frequently, and that is some of the same extraordinary benefits that have been reported throughout the millennia of people in the wisdom traditions, people adepts from any of the major religions or mystical traditions and so on, who have spent their lives deepening their practices, deepening their access to the extraordinary scaled uh, inner resources that are available after a person puts in the years of practice. What we found is that it doesn't necessarily have to take years to start to get a taste of these exceptionally large scale inner resources that are available in the transformative resilience zone that's described up there with the tiny red shape and the butterfly. And again, this is where it can be an existential dilemma. This is really the where the psycho-spiritual rubber meets the road, so to speak. Meaning, here, if not in any of the layers before, here we're facing very directly that we are on a global level facing existential threats, existential threats to not just the 100 to 150 species a day that go extinct because of human impact, but quite possibly our own. At the very least, a massive amount of suffering and a massive amount of unnecessary loss of life is what we are possibly facing, probably facing. So this is the area where there's very little insulation left. We've taken away the insulation from our eyes. We've taken away the addictions and the distractions and so on. And we've expanded our ability to be present, fully present in the face of the stark reality of what we are in the presence of. We are in the midst of the most challenging time in human history. So this is just, I'll be mentioning it in far more detail, but I don't want to leave you in too dark a place. It's just challenging as can be at these higher levels, and it really can be at virtually any level in this model. So what I can speak to directly from my experience is that there are hard to imagine how immense the inner resources that are available in this transformative resilience zone. So let's move forward and eventually get to speaking a bit more about that. Let's first talk about the first aid level of resilience. So this, again, is the place where we either, because we're in denial or because we just literally don't have the space to think about this kind of stuff, we aren't engaged with the real situation that is going on the planet. And so the first aid resilience is really just the most basic level of co-regulation, self-regulation, and other basic resilience skills that we're literally just trying to drag ourselves back into our body, into being able to be present with the ones we love around us, because oftentimes we can be in shock at this level. So the way I put this into a shorthand is that the biggest costs of being knocked off center at this level is that we indeed have either forfeited or have had our center taken from us. And we'll get into far more detail about that if you were to join us in the introductory courses and so on. And I've already mentioned the incredible costs of being dysregulated, having dysregulation. And so these are the costs, primary costs of this business as usual and one problem level of engagement with our world as it is. The living resilience resources that are available for first aid level resilience skills. We have a couple of courses. We have a number of courses, and two of them are really at the very beginning level. I recommend them both, and I recommend them to not only people who are new to this conversation, but also to people who have been around the block, been around this conversation for years or even decades. These are both very, very useful sets of guidance, suggestions, sharing. It's extraordinary material. So just here's the invitation. One is called Learning to Live in Collapse. That's one of our courses. These are recorded, self-paced courses that you'll find in our Living Resilience online community space. And of course, how to get in touch with that space is one of the first things you'll encounter down in the show notes. And Learning to Live in Collapse is actually just a recorded version of and a slightly embellished version of the book club, the Living Resilience Book Club. Late last year, we were focusing on a new book, The Eye of the Storm by Terry LePage. And we include audiobook chapters of each of the chapters of the book. And we also include the recordings of the book club sessions if you would like to hear us talking about it, as we did each week for about 8 weeks. And in a number of those sessions, the author, Terry LePage, came and joined us. It's a remarkable course, and I, again, would recommend it to anybody at any level in this conversation. And by the way, the audio version of the book that we include in that course was narrated by the late Michael Dowd, who himself is an extraordinary exemplar of somebody who has done a lifetime of deep diving into what are the issues that we're facing and how can we put it into context so that we can live full and nourishing lives with one another, no matter what the horizon out ahead of us looks like. In other words, how soon we think collapse is going to be happening in a way that is inarguable in our world. He's, if you take the course, you'll see the notes to be able to touch into his massive body of work along these lines. The other course that we offer that is appropriate to this level is Collateral Beauty. And that's again, the name of our introductory course here in Living Resilience. And it might seem like an odd name, but what we've done is really radically shift the nature of this course so that it is very, very low on the doom scrolling content. I'm afraid that I'm just no longer interested in putting large amounts of doom scrolling content anywhere in this body of work. We don't need that. None of us needs that. With that said, there is an extra section of that course should you want some important information about the various sober data or the topics that often we're doom scrolling about. You can go to that section of the course, which again is kind of an addendum to that course. And you can do a deep dive into if it's climate change or if it's species extinction, or you get the idea. Collateral Beauty. And of course, the support groups that we have, the easiest, most accessible support group that we've been running for going on 9 years now is called Safe Circle Calls. And again, there will be a place where you can click on the link and sign up for the weekly email invitation to the Zoom calls. And each week in those invitations, there are a couple of inspiring videos that will hopefully nudge us toward a particular depth of conversation for the week. So safe circle calls, and you can sign up below. The resilience practices level. So remember, that's the blue globe in the middle. That's the place where people have enough space in their lives to be able to take on, well, what are the kind of skills and capacities that I want to have so that next time I'm not so blown out. I'm not so disconnected from my family. You know, for instance, I like to use an example of, imagine that you and your family are sleeping in the high school gym with 50 other families because your entire neighborhood has been blown away by a hurricane. That's quite conceivable that has happened in a number of communities in the USA, not to mention elsewhere in the world. And so this is after you putting your home back together, you're getting a little bit of life returning to normal, a little bit of routine. So you have a little bit of space to learn some skills. Perhaps you could learn some skills of how to have meaningful conversations in your family. You know, be able to just sit down and circle together with one another and have some constructive conversations rather than oftentimes in families, of course, these days, it can be so much distance and everybody on their own devices, and everybody so completely busy that there's no authentic connection. You might want to learn the skills of leading that kind of circle. That is one of dozens of possible topics, areas of skill sets, capacities that you might want to take on if you were to be engaged with the practices for resilience level of this stages of awareness in these living resilience programs. Well, what I've seen and the way I kind of summarize the biggest costs that we're working on in terms of we're trying to recover ourselves from that saturation of business as usual and that insulation of comfort and the systems working the way they work, and we don't have to think about anything. We can just wait for the next thing to be delivered from Amazon. And when we get out of the one problem level and we're moving into quite thoughtfully, how can I expand my capacities for the next time? I might want to look at where are the reconnections, where are the disconnections that have gotten us here. The shorthand that we often use here is that this culture has disconnected us from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in a human life. And again, the shorthand is that would be disconnected from my deeper self. I'm disconnected from other people, disconnected from earth, and some might say disconnected from soul. So this is a perfect opportunity to curate your own practices of resilience or practices of reconnection, and then to be able to sit in circle with other people. And while your practices will be different than mine, we absolutely have the ability to support one another in those, excuse me, in those different practices. So another way that I particularly like to say that what is the center of my practices and has been for decades now, but especially now, is the reclaiming of center. And that means a number of different dimensions in ourselves that we might not usually think of as center. So obviously we have a physical center. Uh, we also have a mental center, which I like to talk about those practices being that art of sense making that I mentioned way back at the beginning of this video and introducing Daniel Schmachtenberger. So sense making could be considered the reclaiming of center for the mental body. Yeah, there are other centers, but that's enough for now. You get the idea. So like the previous level, we have resources that are specifically aimed at being effective for the practices level. We have a community of practice, which is a very experiential, deep dive group that meets on a regular basis. And this is where the real practice happens. I don't know how to overstate. It's hard to overstate the depth that's available when we get together on a regular basis to share our practices with one another and to support each other in the realization of those practices together. So we also have a meditation course, an online course that is, again, self-paced. And it also involves a number of different elements than I've ever experienced in any other meditation course. So all I can say in this short space is this is a remarkably valuable course in and of itself. And I would recommend it highly. And you don't have to wait until you're at some advanced level. You can join up with and start to practice any of the meditations in that meditation and implicit senses training whenever you'd like. You remember me mentioning sense making. Of course, we have a course in that. And what I can assure you is if you've been involved with the sense making community and conversation and space for a few years, I believe that there will be quite a bit of different material in this particular sense-making grouping. So I invite you, again, whether you're new to this conversation or been around a long time, I would recommend highly giving that a look-see. We are bringing an additional focus, an additional emphasis to embodied or somatic practices to keep being in our head and just be talking with one another, especially in a Zoom or a flat screen environment. There's only a limited amount of transformation or even considerable change that's available in that environment of just being verbal and just sitting and not being any more aware of any of the aspects of our soma or our somatic awareness, our body awareness. And really the 5 bodies, 5 centers is just another way of saying reclaiming center. And way more on that when you enroll in any of these courses or get into the community of practice experiential group. So enough for now for the practices for resilience and the resources there. So now we're at the transformative level of resilience. And this is, again, an extraordinary transition that's been hinted at. I can't stress strongly enough that the vast majority of people who sincerely engage at that last level of the practices of resilience, they start to get a taste for this level. It just is a natural expression that seems to show up. So this again is that small red dot at the far right, the smallest number of people that we've been talking about yet. Uh, Paul Chefurka talks about maybe 1 in 10,000. I think it's even less than that. So doesn't matter. It's a small number. Transformative resilience, and this is the realm of the extraordinary, the ineffable, the unspeakable from all the wisdom traditions. This is where those reside. And so this is our approach pattern to get ourselves somewhere in the vicinity of these immense resources. And here's the irony. Of course, they are all within us all the time. So let's check it out. With transformative practices, what some of the resources that are available are advanced coherence and co-regulation. And so I don't know if that communicates to you, if you're familiar with those terms. I'm just going to need to leave them for now, anticipating that you will ask questions when you get to any of our events or any of our support groups, and hopefully you'll dive right into things like the collateral beauty course and so on. Activating, desaturating, and reconnecting practices. Those are different kinds of practices. Activating parts of us that have been suppressed or shut down by our culture primarily. Desaturating, meaning how on earth are we supposed to get ourselves even a slightly nose above water from the business as usual paradigm if we aren't actively desaturating ourselves somehow from that lifetime of saturation. And of course, we've already spoken about reconnecting practices. These are just at the next level. Really, this is the realm of soul, and this is the realm of the sacred. This is the realm that Ian McGilchrist would call the implicit. So I'm going to need to leave it there. And I'm hoping that these words, at least some of them, will have some resonance for you in terms of aspirational states, a state of being that we could aspire to inviting into our lives on a regular basis. And this, the last thing I'll say about this transformative end of things, and actually with the advanced end of the practices for resilience as well, this, to be the simplest way I can say it, is that here reside many responses to the question, if not climate anxiety or climate depression or eco-anxiety or loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness, and so on and so on. If not those things which are so rampant in our world, then what? What if it were possible that we all still had the exact same amount of problems in the world, all of them just as active and fierce as we've seen them grow to today? What if we had all those same problems and predicaments in place? And what if we could have a daily and very regular experience of the sacred, of the oneness, of the sometimes called the interbeing that's possible in this world? What if we could have a level of spiritual intimacy with one another that was more profound than any feeling of intimacy we had experienced in all the earlier years of our lives? I feel confident in saying that these are actually available. And unfortunately, it'll be that small red dot, the very, very few folks that will do the inner work to be able to access those states and those incredible resources. All the living resilience resources are available in our online community space. That's, of course, the link to that community space. And it's quite a clear place to be able to sign up for the Living Resilience community space. You'll be able to sign up for at a no cost level, a zero cost membership level, and those introductory courses that I mentioned are available at that level. It would be greatly appreciated if you chose one of the paid levels, which was basically a $5 a month or $20 a month, or I think there's as much as $30 or $50 a month, and there's ways to donate beyond that. What I can promise you is this is very much a labor of love, and it has never been a money-making proposition. And it needs to be able to survive. It needs to be able to flourish, and needs contribution in order to be able to do that. So if it's within your capacity to contribute, we would greatly appreciate it. And if it is prohibitive for you to participate in some of the paid programs, even at the $5 level, please do not hesitate to. I will include contact information for me. And you'll just get in touch with me and let me know that that is the case. And we will give you a link to be able to participate at no cost whatsoever. So it is, we have never intended to make any request for tuition or for paying a fee for a course or service here to be prohibitive. So we hope you will make yourself at home here and avail yourself of all the resources that you would find valuable. And we hope to I hope to meet you sometime soon in one of the support groups or one of the events that we are going to be having in 2024. This is going to be an extraordinary year for our events, our live online events. So please stay tuned in the main space of the online community space here in Living Resilience, and pay attention because they're coming soon, and it would be great to have you there, meet you there. So a reminder that we started out with, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. We are in a profoundly sick society, and it takes work. It takes strong inner work, and it also takes a coherent community, a coherent circle, coherent relationships and partnerships to be able to support one another, to do the inner work, to be able to move beyond or be far more functional within that sick society. Well, as promised, here at the end of the presentation about this work of living resilience and the inner work of collapse, we have one last clip from Daniel Schmachtenberger in the conference in Sweden late last year. And this is his final set of remarks in the last couple of minutes of his presentation time. And I hope it will be easy for you to see how we came up with this progression of the various skills, capacities, and inner work for facing collapse that we've come up with. Here is Daniel Schmachtenberger really just putting a bow on the end of his presentation and speaking to, so what can people do? You'll hear the question. And I've never heard him speak with this level of gravitas And so I would invite you, if Daniel Schmachtenberger is new to you, I'd be very interested to hear. Perhaps you could leave comments in the show notes, or we could speak at some gathering within the living resilience world. I'd be very interested in hearing your response, your reaction to this gravitas, this urgency and yet groundedness that he's coming up with at a very different level than any time I've heard him before. So I hope you'll find great value in this final few moments with Daniel Schmachtenberger. And I hope also that it weaves together in an easy way to be able to see the context, the greater context for this work, the idea of inner work of collapse. You can start to see it being spelled out, the parameters and the depth of the work necessary to be able to step up at the level that Daniel's calling us out for. So thank you again for your attention, and hope to see you soon in some sort of living resilience event or course or support group. Again, thanks.
I mean, digesting this, how can you not become depressed if you really take this in? Because it's quite complex, it's just so dark what you're saying and what we need to do as society.
I think people, can you hear me? Okay. I think people should let themselves become depressed. I think if they are not, they're so schismed inside, it's hard to even think of people as humans. If you can know the reality of what's happening in factory farms and just be stoked, it's not my problem. If you can know how many kids are in the sex trade globally, if you can know what the destruction of species looks like and you aren't depressed, there's something really wrong with you. But the reason you're depressed, if you let yourself be, the reason that you might not be is because you won't let yourself be. Either you're actually an obligate sociopath that just can't feel shit, or you won't let yourself be because it's overwhelming and you don't know what to do with that. Trust that. Let yourself go there anyways. And then recognize that the reason you're depressed is not just what it means for you, but because you love animals. And the animals that are being destroyed are not that different than your dog. And because you love kids, not just your own, and the other kids that are being in totally fucked situations and the future kids that won't have a chance at life are not that different than your kids. And the reason for the depression at all is because life is actually beautiful and sacred, and the depression is recognizing the destruction of the sacred. Then there's like, okay, well, I'm here, and I have some agency, I have some capacity. I can do something about it. I don't know how to yet, but I'm not going to let myself do anything other than figure out how, and then act on that, and then when it's insufficient, figure out how. As opposed to, I'll wait till someone else figures it out, or when I figure out how, even though I'm not allocating time to trying. So, yeah, I want people to feel the depression and the outrage and the fear, because it means that they are not just deadening themselves and fragmenting inside. And then I want them to not allow themselves the cognitive dissonance to forget and just care more about the messages that came in today that totally don't fucking matter in comparison. And then I want you to realize that you can't focus on the bad guy over there. And then you also can't let yourself stop or not act because you don't know how, but you also can't act doing things that you know won't work, so you have to learn. You have to try to figure it out and talk to other people that are. And then recognize that if life was not actually beautiful, meaningful, and sacred to you, you would give no shits at all that it's being destroyed. And so don't act out of anger, depression, and fear. Act out of that sense of the sacred, and that you are in service to a life that is beautiful, to a life with a capital L, a world that is beautiful, and that you're at a time when there is a higher possible consequence of your action than there has ever been for humans. And there is an obligation in that, and there is a meaningfulness in that you don't want to waste.
Thank you for joining me in this longer than expected introduction to living resilience and the inner work of collapse. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your intent. And thank you for whatever way you find to live your path in this, the most extraordinary time in human history. And hope to meet up with you soon here in the living resilience space. Thanks again. Thank you for joining us in another episode of the Poetry of Predicament. This podcast is produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance. Living Resilience exists to offer transformative support and resources to the collapse-aware and collapse-acceptant communities around the world. Our sole purpose is to curate and offer coaching, support groups, courses, and events that assist people in expanding their core skills, competencies, and capacities for facing a troubled, predicament-laden, yet still ineffably miraculous world.